The question of women's sports is interesting. Whatever the past of the West has been, it is clear that at this point in time, the developed nations of the world regard equality as a chief principle. Even leaving the left alone, moderates would rise up to protest misogyny. They will mock and ridicule other cultures for either acknowledging these differences or worse, making policy decisions based on them. Over the years, the West has helped women gain every freedom under the sun in the name of equality, from the right to work in offices and strip bars to a right to kill unwanted fetuses that prevent them from exercising the potential that they have. Apparently, all this potential is not enough for them to be able to compete with men in sports successfully. Few men who have wanted to gain a little from this progressive value of equality that West has used to bludgeon its own people and other nations, to dispel equality and freedom to people in other countries by subverting their governments or outright using military might on them, have been left stranded because apparently all this talk of equality was a hogwash and men were never supposed to benefit from it. Scott Adams, who is a conservative in few respects, critiqued a quote by a founding editor of Quillette that argued that while men's sports are an open division, women's sports are a protected category. Women deserve a separate category. The editor holds this view. Presumably, men don't because their division is an open division. You would assume that this statement would anger people from the whole spectrum. It would make egalitarians angry. It would also make misogynists upset. But the reaction is actually not quite like that. Scott Adams thinks nobody deserves anything. Adam Friended thinks that is a dictatorial thinking. Adam tries to show that it is fallacious because if no one deserves anything, then it means that someone at the top dispenses them rights and privileges based on what he thinks is appropriate. Consider for a moment that Friended is right. If that is really the case, should we decide whether trans women or biological men reserve the right to compete in women's category? If we already believe that right to equality exists, can consequences be enough justification for overturning the rights in a specific circumstance? The same rights we propagate. If the answer is yes, then what is that criteria which allows that overturning of rights? One of the arguments is that the inclusion of men in women's sports would make sports unfair. That is bizarre considering that there are already genetic factors involved in sports and also few cases involving hyperandrogenism. And the line distinguishing men and women based on competence in sports is not as straightforward as it seems. Friended rejects that argument as a basis for his defense, though. He argues on the basis of a consequentialist perspective. Friended, much like Peterson and Haidt, takes the view that principles can be compromised if it leads to creation of a better society. It is not clear whose standard of good they are using. It seems that they are using the standard of evolutionary survivability, but the society's survival is surely not contingent on the fact whether trans women or biological men can compete with women in sports or not. Friended, however, wishes to make a deeper point. The different paths to power that individuals possess that allows them to compete for status in different domains is what prevents political violence, according to him. The West, he argues on the basis of a book, has been successful in creating different competitive zones which allow individuals an easier time to excel in traits that they possess, creating a net benefit for the society. Friended is not wrong here, but that view is indeed consequentialist and has all the problems associated with consequentialism. And different hierarchies and paths to power, different rules may be applicable. And those rules are defended via different reasoning. For example, we all have to pretend that women can compete with men in jobs requiring physical strength, in a sense that in such a job, the owner of the business has to allow both men and women to apply and then give them a fair opportunity and make any decisions after that. Otherwise, he would be restricting women's path to power, and we cannot have that. However, we also have to believe that women cannot compete with men in sports. requiring physical strength, and men trying to participate in women's sports must be rejected a priori. Otherwise, we would be restricting women's path to power, and we cannot have that. And of course, if a man punches a pregnant woman and kills the fetus, he is charged with the murder. But when the woman does that, it is her right. Otherwise, we would be restricting women's path to power. And what about social settings, where women may feel intimidated by men's dominant attitudes, or sexual relations where women may be unable to say no? Of course, at least a few women have fought earnestly for putting a leash on men's display of dominance, and for different and varying standards of consent during the coitus. The fight for power is not restricted to sports or even competing arenas of excellence. That the concept of justice presupposes equity of standards to some extent at the very least. The consequentialism derides any such equity. The greatest feature of the West that has allowed it to prosper is indeed based on nothing else but the shallow waters of liberalism, wherein the principles are twisted and values are compromised in order to maintain an illusion of peace. Of course, without principles, there is little violence, for there is no thing which is worth enough to die for. The West calls it an achievement, the shameless switching from one position on the rights to another. But who is the loser? The individual. Fighting for right to equality all your life. One day, if you decide to get the benefits of that yourself, you may be denied those by the very same society that professes individualism and right to equality. You are not fit because of what you do may destroy a girl's dream of getting a medal. Her ambitions trump principles of the West. Your wishes are just a collateral sacrifice. In those times, the West is reminded of the Demokratia, the will of the people, which apparently is not applicable in a lot of other cases. When you see activists saying that the majority cannot decide the fate of the minority, this is the dictatorship of the moderates, the men without principles.